During the break, we've been talking about G-strings and going commando. You don't want to go anywhere. You want to stay with us here on LBC. We might even tell you what we were talking about in just a short time. But for now, it is hot seat time. That sort of time on the programme when we introduce you or reintroduce you to someone that you may have been slightly aware of, but want to know more about their character, who they are, what they do. And this week, we're joined by the doyenne of branding, as she's been described. She's laughing at me. The speaker, a writer, a business leader, and a portfolio director, Rita Clifton. Hi, Rita.
Good morning.
Very good morning to you. So, tell us what your greatest achievement's been so far.
Oh, my goodness.
It's nice to be here with two doyennes, by the way.
Thank you very much.
I've not had that before.
I'm not sure how to behave as a doyenne. I have to think about that one. My greatest achievements are, of course, my children. And if they're listening, naturally, they want me to say.
Absolutely.
Oh, I mean, look, I've been very lucky. I've had lots of interesting jobs over the years. And when you talk to people about their brands, their personal brands, their business brands and everything else, it really is very interesting because often you end up as like the corporate therapist. So that is a privilege to do. And over the years, I don't know, I worked at Saatchi & Saatchi in its maddest, baddest, big growth period, and I worked on British Airways and BT and BP. I mean, it was fantastic. It was very, very exciting, but there's never a more exciting time than what you're doing right now, I don't think. So.
And with branding, I mean, there's some cynicism about people's brands and the idea of brands. Is it, you're not going to agree with this, but I'll ask it anyway, is it the sort of the ultimate triumph of style over substance, a brand?
Fighting talk, but of course that's when you do branding really badly.
Yeah.
It's like when you think that a new twiddle or a new name or something is going to make a bad or confused business any better. So, of course, real branding works. It makes everything work better. It's the way you answer the phone, it's the way that you serve customers, it's the way you recruit people. It's everything you do that's going to make some sort of competitive difference and build some sort of sustainable value. If you just stick the twiddle on, as I say, and do some advertising, you'll just make a bad company go out of business even faster.
So what do you do when a company calls on you in dire straits? What do you do to help them with their brand?
Well, first of all, you've got to understand what the problem is.
Yeah.
You've got to talk to their stakeholders, you've got to talk to their customers, you've got to talk to the management team and just get a proper view about what it is that's going on there, what it is that business has got that might be unique and different and better. And then you think about, how you can make it better, how you can make it much clearer about what it stands for, how you can make sure that it connects better with its customers and its audiences, and critically its people now, because when you think about the digital age, when you think about whatever you do gets out there.
Very quickly as well.
With a scale and a speed that will take your breath away. If you don't look after your people, if you don't look after your customers, they will tell people, and that will have a multiplier effect that will send you down. Whereas, of course, if you've got people understanding what they're trying to do, how you're going to build the organisation together, what they're all going to do that's going to make a difference, if they believe in that, if your own people believe in it, then they'll go and tell other people. They'll be your best ambassadors. They'll also be your nightmare whistleblowers if you don't get it right. That's another way of saying also you've got to have internal to external consistency on your brand. That's what I mean. In fact, you can't pretend. You can't just spend lots of money on saying we're wonderful, we're smiley, we're great customer service organisations when you're an axe-murdering culture on the inside. People find out,
Tell us, so a brand like, that's a basket case at the moment, allegedly, like the Co-op. Well, how would you start to fix that?
Well, what's very interesting about the Co-op is that it was an organisation with a great idea of its time. The problem now is that they have allowed their structure, their whole governance structure, dictate what they can do with strategy rather than the other way around. So normally, with any good organisation, you think about where are we going, what are we trying to be in the future, that's your strategy. And then you think about how you need to organise yourself to deliver it. The problem with the Co-op, it is a sprawling, complicated, unruly structure that only allows people to do what can be politely agreed as opposed to what might be really effective for its customers in the future. So it's a really, really big ask. What it needs to say to itself is, what are we here? What are we here to do? What do our customers need us to do? What are we going to be able to do in the future that's going to be better than some of our competitors? They need to think about that and then think about how they can A, organise themselves, and B, develop all their products and services to deliver that. And at the moment, because of their very, very complex governing structure, they're not able to have those kinds of honest debates and clear thinking.
But there's a problem there, isn't there? Because it's very hard to detoxify the brand. If their brand is based on being cooperative, being this sprawling organisation where every member has a chance to influence, and you need to say, well, actually, strategically, you need to slim down and make sure you can make decisions. That actually is their brand. So your strategic advice would run counter to their brand, wouldn't it?
Well, the problem is that they've got a lot of turkeys at the moment around the board and they don't want to vote for Christmas. That's one of the critical things. And I totally agree. It needs to be cooperative. That's great. But you've got to be cooperative about something that's actually going to be effective. So there's no point in just being cooperative because you want to sort of be with other people around a table discussing stuff. You've got to assemble the business in a way that's actually going to have some sort of successful future. And the markets they're in are incredibly competitive. They've really got to think about what it is that they've got to say about themselves. And being cooperative is great, but you've got to move somewhere. You've got to get somewhere. And that means taking some very hard decisions. And if you've got people around the table who are representing bits and pieces of the organisation, if they're not independent of you, they're not going to succeed because they're not going to be able to make the kind of objective decisions that you need.
So who do you think gets it right at the moment? Last week we had the Innocent Smoothie chief exec
in a pair of shorts. He was uber on. He couldn't be more on brand. He was in a pair of shorts.
Absolutely. Do you know? I don't think there are any ugly people who work for Innocent.
Yeah.
I have never met one. And of course, they look fragrant. They look as though they've eaten and drunk the products that they're producing. They really do live their brand, and that is both in a substance point of view and also it looks great and it talks great on the top too. So that works really, really well. I mean, you have got some very good organisations. Nationwide, for example, is an organisation that has got a different structure, different ownership structure, as we were discussing with the co-op. But actually, that's an organisation that's really focused around its customers and its members, and it does it in a way that is, pretty inspiring, I would say. That does very well. You mentioned another basket case. I mean, Mothercare. What a great brand.
I know.
That used to be.
Yeah. Is that not good now?
No. Oh, no. It's interesting, isn't it? Because that ought to be a brand with a cause, shouldn't it? It should be a brand that people really care about. Because, what's more important than worrying about the future and looking after the future and looking after our future families? It's a real tragedy what's happened to that business.
The share price is shocking as well, isn't it?
Well, the share price is shocking. There are all sorts of issues to it. But I think that there is still a lot of potential for that brand and that business.
I think it's running out of time, though, isn't it?
Well, if you've got a strong brand name...
Give them some advice now, Rita. Tell them what to do.
I'm afraid that's going to cost them a lot of money.
Give them a tiny trail of advice so they could pay up for it later on.
Well, as I said, and we were discussing earlier, you've got to make sure that you're clear about what it is that you're there for. Now, I think Mothercare are pretty clear about what it is that they're there for. They just haven't been as broad-minded, in my view, about how to deliver that. And they haven't got their people critically really excited and rallied around what that might be. And I think that job should be a cause. Absolutely. You've got to have staff who are inspired to help mothers and to help people who want to have families. There ought to be something in there that you could really, really work on. Rita,
did you get brought in when there are crises? So sort of as part of sort of the post-crisis moment where you're starting to rebuild an image, and you look at brands like, say they take the subject of tax, Amazon or Starbucks, where there's an issue, they've had to deal with the issue. Or BP, you work with BP, I think, didn't you, at some point where there was the Deepwater disaster. Mm. Are you someone that comes in after the first disaster has hit to start rebuilding? Is that something that you do? And is that an important thing to be asked to do?
There can be lots of reasons why you're brought in. I mean, either a company wants to invent a new brand or it wants to reinvent itself. And sometimes when it wants to reinvent itself, companies are on the up. They're thinking, hey, this is great, but we need a bit of creative destruction because we want to make sure we're great in 5 years or 10 years. Now, that's the far-sighted companies. But also, absolutely, you might go into a business that says everything is, at the moment, you don't want to say rude words, but things aren't great at the moment. We've got to, start again from the bottom. Now, if you have a particular screw-up, what I will say, if you've got a strong brand and a small screw-up, you're fine. If you've got a weak brand and a big screw-up, you're screwed. if you've got a strong brand and a big screw-up, you can recover if you do it well. Now, Toyota have done a great job. There's a few more big screw-ups than if people have died seemingly and allegedly as a result of what you've been doing. That is a really big screw-up. But I think Toyota have turned that business round. They've got their people believing in what they're doing again. They've used their people in advertising to say we're doing all these things so much better. They have really turned it round. And actually I think BP have really, they've got their heads down.
You worked with them, didn't you?
I have worked with them in the past, and
that was part of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, was it? In the Gulf of Mexico. Did you work with them at that time?
No, I didn't. I serve on an advisory board, which is for their Target Neutral brand, which is their carbon offsetting brand. So I wasn't directly involved in that, but actually I do think that they have done a decent job since then. Obviously, at the time, it was a nightmare on just about every level, and
badly handled.
It wasn't as well handled as it should have been, and I think what was particularly unfortunate is that when you've got a British chief executive and an American disaster, I mean, what accents do villains have in Hollywood movies? They're often British. So British Voice also enabled the American administration to say things like British Petroleum.
Oh, Obama kept
loudly.
saying that, didn't he?
He did. And, of course, BP haven't been called British Petroleum for many years. So that was very unfortunate. I mean, actually, on a slightly sort of smaller scale, the horse meat scandal, Findus. I'm sure we've got our own jokes, and it was a very serious thing to happen, but, it was I ate a Findus beef lasagna last night, and I woke up this morning with a bit between my teeth.
Well
Have you
done.
heard that one?
Yeah, I'm afraid
There are lots
so.
of terrible finales, but, that was a weak brand at the time.
That was a weak
brand.
joke, actually.
And a weakened joke. It wasn't mine. I'm glad to say it was not my joke. There are many, many others. But they were in disarray. They handled it so badly. There was no spokesperson. They'd fired most of their communications people just a few years before. So it was very, very badly handled. There was no one to speak for them. And frankly, their supply chain, their organisation was in tatters at the time.
We're going to have to take a very short break, if we might, please, Rita. Might, please? May, please. Honestly, my English is appalling. Good job you're here with your Cambridge English degree, isn't it? To keep
I don't know why I mentioned an English degree now.
Are you impressed by that, Rita?
I'm very impressed.
I know that I am.
Cambridge classicist here.
I know. We're going to come on to that. We're also going to come on to what it's like being a senior woman in big business and whether or not Rita ever wanted to be a ballet dancer. The answer is yes.
Oh, no.
This is LBC. It's 9:46. In conversation today with Rita Clifton, branding guru. It's great to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for taking the time. You didn't always want to be a branding guru. You wanted to be a ballet dancer, didn't you?
Do you know, I do not know where people drag this up from, but yes, it's true. At one point in my life, I did want to be a ballet dancer, probably with about 90% of other young girls, but I had a slightly traumatic event, which is that my parents were thinking, shall I go to ballet school or should I go to grammar school? And I remember my father looking at my legs one day and saying, I think it's grammar school.
Oh!
I'm afraid I've had to live with that as a burden for the rest of my... Anyway, I'm really quite grateful in some
he may
ways.
have been right in the end.
Thanks very much for pointing that
You
out.
didn't
I
mean
think
that,
so
did you?
too.
Well, what a successful career. Who knows what would have happened had you gone down the ballet route? It's a very risky career, ballet dancing.
Bad feet. I think it would have been a bit of a nightmare. But anyway, there we are. It's a fantasy at the time, and I'm glad I ended up doing what I'm doing. So.
What's it like being a senior woman in big business?
Well, I must say, I have genuinely never found any discrimination or anything of that kind in my career. I've been very, very lucky. I suppose it's been partly the businesses I've been in, so media businesses, advertising and so on. Although, ironically, only a tiny percentage of creative directors in advertising agencies, even now, are women. I think it's something like 3%.
Why is that?
I'm not sure. I think it's in part the culture of creative departments, which tends to be quite, go for it and a little bit macho. There are 80% of creative departments made up by guys, which is odd because 80% of the products and services that are advertised on television, for example, are either bought by or the purchases led by women. So it's quite a different and sensitive issue, actually, at the moment, still in the advertising business. However, having said that, as far as general management is concerned, the women were much more widely represented. But it's a very topical issue at the moment, women on boards and leading boards, because, of course, apparently the Prime Minister wants a woman to head the BBC, which is rather interesting. And slightly ironic, as there are only 3 women in the Cabinet at the moment. That seems an interesting...
Do you think there should be quotas? Because, of course, the Labour Party they have all women shortlists. They have set themselves a quota for senior women in the senior position. And as a result, they have a greater representation of women. Would you be in favour of quotas in business and politics?
I'm uneasy about quotas because I think that in the main women want to be there because they deserve to be there. I think what's interesting is that on a voluntary basis, the Davis report in 2011 was looking at women on boards and how to get more women on boards. And at the time, there were only about 12% of FTSE 100 boards that were made up. There were 12% of women on boards in FTSE 100 companies. Mm-hmm. And now it's gone up to over 20%. Now, that was quite encouraging just in a few years, and the Davis report wants to make sure there are about 25% of women on board.
Shouldn't it be 50%?
2015. Well,
are we not settling 25%? Sounds a bit weak.
We are on a journey, and I should just say a couple of things. Number one is there are some very practical reasons why sometimes there aren't more women in the workplace as you would want them to be. But actually, that reflects the fact that a lot of expectation is that people will go out of the workplace in, at the age of 55, 60, early 60s and so on. There's been a lot of talk recently about returnships, not just internships, which I think is a really, really important and interesting idea. I know lots of women in their 40s and 50s, even 60s, who've maybe raised families, they've spent some time out of the workforce. They'd be perfectly capable of coming back in to big businesses and going back up again in the hierarchy, because at the moment, the way the metabolism of an executive career works is that, you sort of go up like sort of relentlessly, almost up a slope. You get to the top of the slope and then maybe you kind of fade off after that. Whereas actually women often have 2 peaks to their careers, if not 3. So I think there's more open-mindedness we need to have, and I think if we can get the voluntary behaviour happening as it is at the moment, because there have been some significant increases, I'd much prefer that than to have quotas. If that doesn't work, of course we need to have quotas, because what's ironic is a lot of guys who chair boards, chief executives of executive boards and everything else, they all say having more women on those committees, those boards, etc., makes a real difference. People behave better, you take less risks, and lots of studies would say that boards that have more women on them perform better in terms of margin, in terms of profit, and also critically in terms of minimising risk.
We were talking about presentation earlier and how one presents oneself. When I first started in my career in broadcasting, the late great Sir David Frost said, you need to look the part. You're invading someone's living room. And then if you look the part, then people will listen to what you have to say after that. That's just as important in everyday life, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and sometimes people say to me, particularly young people, they say, well, it shouldn't matter what I look like. I know what I can do and blah, blah, blah. But that's a bit like if you were a company advising one of your customers or clients and saying, look, it's okay, you can have a great product, but you can wrap it up in a rubbishy old box and stick it on a shelf, it'll be okay. You wouldn't say that. Now, that's not everything. It does matter, of course, how you present yourself. It does matter what you look like. It does matter what you sound like and how you present and everything else. But also, the thing that really matters is your behaviour, your knowledge, your skills. You've got to keep those up to date. And, if you want to get on a board, you need to understand how to read a balance sheet. If you want to be on a board, you need to understand the language of finance, because that's the language of the boardroom. Now, it's extending and it's changing in the way that executives are remunerated these days, which, of course, is a very contentious discussion and issue. That's being broadened to make sure that, the metrics are about whether or not you're making customers happy, whether or not your staff are happy, and so on. But at the end of the day, you need to understand how finance works and making sure those skills are up to date. And also, just looking around the boardroom table sometimes, not everybody is using modern technology. All of these things are important to make sure that you are learning and developing and adopting, because otherwise, if you're not careful, you're an older business person out of time.
Do you think looks though become part of your personal brand when you talk to people? Do you, in the big ambit of branding? do you say how you carry yourself, what clothes you wear, how you sort of walk into a meeting? Those are key factors in how people will regard you. I don't want you to criticise what I'm wearing, but the idea of that looks are important is a thing.
Well, let's just say it's good it's on radio, but I
yeah. I'm wearing a mankini. But that's
Again.
I'm comfortable.
all these things do matter, the way you carry yourself. I mean, if you go on presentation skills courses, then they always talk about how you breathe, how you carry yourself. You've got to breathe from the below as opposed to just do head breathing. I mean, all those things are very important. I personally find Bark's rescue remedy very useful.
Me too.
Do you as well? So people often look at you as though you're absolutely barking.
We'll tell you later
on stuff. Absolutely. However, everyone's got their own little devices, or they've got their own rituals and everything else before they go into meetings or make a speech or whatever. But there are some techniques, and particularly for women, we were talking about that earlier, when you're sitting around a boardroom table, when you're presenting in front of other people, you do need to make sure that your voice gets heard. And just from a very practical point of view, women's voices tend to be higher naturally than guys' voices, and so therefore you need to be able to learn to train your voice and to use it in a way that that at least cuts through. Now, of course, the arch proponent of this, I'm not sure whether this is a good thing to mention, Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah. And Kay Burley, actually.
Margaret Thatcher, I'm not making any comments on the other one, but it's true, she absolutely transformed the way that people saw her. I mean, we talked earlier about you need clarity about what your brand stands for. I mean, her clarity was she wanted to be a strong leader, and everything then around her was strong. Even her hair was strong. It was very stiff, her voice became very strong, her wardrobe became very strong, and so on. So it was all consistent. It worked together, and it was effective.
We've got 30 seconds left to talk about your lifelong crush on...
Oh, David Attenborough. David Attenborough, I had a crush on him from the age of 7. He made sure that I was interested in sustainability and the environment for the rest of my life too. And I had the privilege of being able to tell a room full of people, confess to a room full of people a couple of years ago that I was secretly in love with... In fact, I wasn't even secretly in love with David Attenborough anymore. I'd come out and told people. This man is a total hero, he's a national treasure, and I'm so thrilled he's still with us on this planet.
Well, I've just got a new LBC crush, Rita Clifton, and it's you. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Still to come this morning. 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 Still to